Good morning, third grade. This is my fourth attempt at trying to get something recorded because I've been just taking pictures when I turn this thing on. I keep trying to do the video, but I just keep taking all these weird pictures of myself. I hope you guys are doing well on officially day 2 of quarantine away from school. I got a late start this morning. I got my coffee going here. It says, I think I'll just be happy today, which I hope you guys will too. Remember that when we were reading Harry Potter yesterday and The Prisoner of Azkaban, they had a horrible lesson in divination with Professor Trelawney. Then they went to Transfiguration with McGonagall, who was like, hey, Trelawney does this all the time. She always predicts that somebody's going to die. So, sorry, you're not going to get out of homework, Harry. Then so Harry's getting in a little bit better mood, and then they make their way down to Care of Magical Creatures with Hagrid, and it's his very first time teaching. It's his first lesson ever. And remember that Malfoy's kind of being a jerk. He's just kind of a bully. And remember, he's not a bully for no reason. There is stuff going on in his home life, and he's taking it out on other people. Anyway, there are reasons why people are bullies. Don't forget that. All right. Ooh, squealed Lavender Brown, pointing towards the opposite side of the paddock. Trotting towards them were a dozen of the most bizarre creatures Harry had ever seen. They had the bodies, hind legs, and tails of horses. But the front legs, wings, and heads of what seemed to be giant eagles with cruel, steel-colored beaks and large, brilliantly colored orange eyes. The talons on their front legs were half a foot long and deadly looking. Each of the beasts had a thick leather collar around their necks, which was attached to a long chain, and the ends of all of these were held in the vast hands of Hagrid. Vast means like big or wide. The vast hands of Hagrid, who came jogging into the paddock behind the creatures. "Get up there," he roared, shaking the chains and urging the creatures towards the fence where the class stood. Everyone drew back slightly as Hagrid reached them with the tethered creatures on the fence. "Hippogriffs!" Hagrid roared happily, waving a hand at them. "Beautiful, aren't they?" Harry could sort of see what Hagrid meant. Once you got over the first shock of seeing something that was half horse, half bird, you kind of started to appreciate the hippogriffs' gleaming coats, changing smoothly from feather to hair, each of them a different color. Stormy gray, bronze, a pinkish roan, gleaming chestnut, and inky black. "So," said Hagrid, rubbing his hands together and beaming around, "if you want to come a bit nearer." No one seemed to want to. Harry, Ron, and Hermione, however, approached the fence cautiously. "Now, first thing you gotta know about hippogriffs is that they're proud creatures," said Hagrid. "Easily offended, hippogriffs are. Don't never insult one, 'cause it might be the last thing you do." Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle weren't listening. They were talking in an undertone, and Harry had a nasty feeling they were plotting how to best disrupt Hagrid's first class. "You always wait for the hippogriff to make the first move," Hagrid continued. "It's polite, see? You walk towards him, and you bow, and you wait. And if he bows back, you're allowed to touch him. If he doesn't bow, then get away from him sharply. 'Cause those talons, they hurt." "Right, who wants to go first?" Most of the class backed away further in answer. Even Harry, Ron, and Hermione had misgivings. The hippogriffs were tossing their fierce heads and flexing their powerful wings. They didn't seem to like being tethered up like this or tied up like this. "No one?" said Hagrid with a pleading look. I'll do it," said Harry. There was an intake of breath from behind him, from both Lavender and Parvati whispered, "Oh no, Harry, remember your tea leaves." Remember, they think Professor Trelawney made a prediction that Harry was going to die, and now he's walking towards these giant, terrifying creatures. Probably not super smart on Harry's part, but, he's doing what he thinks is right for Hagrid, so good on Harry. Harry ignored them. He climbed over the paddock fence. "Good man, Harry," roared Hagrid. "Right then, let's see how you get along with Buckbeak." He untied one of the chains, pulled the gray hippogriff away from his fellows, and slipped off his leather collar. The class on the other side of the paddock fence seemed to be holding its breath. Malfoy's eyes were narrowed maliciously, which means like meanly or evilly or in a very bad way. "Easy now, Harry," said Hagrid quietly. You've got eye contact. Now try not to blink. Hippogriffs don't trust you if you blink too much." Harry's eyes immediately began to water, but he did everything he could not to shut them. Buckbeak had turned his great sharp head, and he was staring at Harry with one fierce orange eye. "That's it," said Hagrid. "That's it, Harry. Now bow." Harry didn't feel much like exposing the back of his neck to this great big Buckbeak. But he did as he was told. He gave a short bow and then looked up. The hippogriff was still staring at him. It didn't move. "Ah," said Hagrid, sounding worried. "Right, back away now, Harry. Easy does it. Back away." But then, to Harry's enormous surprise, the hippogriff suddenly bent his scaly front knee and sank into what was unmistakably a bow. "Well done," said Hagrid, ecstatic. "Right now, you can touch him. Go pat his beak. Go on." Feeling that a better reward would have been to let Harry go back with the rest of his class, Harry moved slowly towards the hippogriff and reached out towards him. He patted the beak several times, and the hippogriff closed his eyes lazily as though enjoying it. The class broke into an applause, all except for, you can guess, Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, who were all looking deeply disappointed that Harry wasn't torn from limb to limb. This was more than Harry had bargained for. He was used to a broomstick, but he wasn't sure a hippogriff would be quite the same. Oh, I missed a whole part. I'm so sorry. Back up. After Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle looked deeply disappointed, Hagrid said, "Right then, Harry," said Hagrid. "I reckon he might be ready for you to ride him." This was more than Harry had bargained for. He was used to a broomstick, but he wasn't sure a hippogriff would be quite the same. "Yeah, climb up there, just behind the wing joint," said Hagrid. "And mind you don't pull out any of his feathers. He won't like that." Harry put his foot on top of Buckbeak's wing and hoisted himself onto his back. Buckbeak stood up, and Harry wasn't sure where to hold on. Everything in front of him was covered in feathers. "Go on!" roared Hagrid, slapping the hippogriff's hindquarters. Without warning, 12-foot wings flapped open on either side of Harry. He had just had time to seize Hippogriff around the neck before he was soaring upwards. It was nothing like a broomstick, and Harry knew which one he preferred. The Hippogriff's wings were beating uncomfortably on either side of him, catching under his legs and making him feel as though he was about to be thrown off. The glossy feathers slipped under his fingers, and he didn't dare get a stronger grip. Instead of the smooth action of his Nimbus 2000, he now felt himself rocking backwards and forwards as the hindquarters of Hippogriff rose and fell with its wings. Imagine Harry has his broomstick, which is like easily controlled. Harry's in control of the whole thing. It's really steady. And now he's on top of a half horse, half eagle who beats its wings and has a muscly back and a mind of its own and keeps moving. It would be very, very different. Buckbeak flew him once around the paddock and then headed back to the ground. And this was the bit Harry had been dreading. He leant back as the smooth neck lowered, feeling as though he was going to slip off the beak. Then he felt a heavy thud as the 4 ill-assorted feet hit the ground and just managed to hold on and push himself straight again. "Good work, Harry!" roared Hagrid as everyone except Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle cheered. "Okay, who else wants to go?" Emboldened, or feeling empowered by Harry's success, the rest of the class climbed cautiously into the paddock. Hagrid untied the rest of the hippogriffs one by one, and soon people were bowing nervously all over the paddock. Neville ran repeatedly backwards from his, which didn't seem to want to bend its knees and bow in return. Ron and Hermione practiced on the chestnut hippogriff while Harry watched. Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle had taken over Buckbeak. He had bowed to Malfoy, who was now patting his beak, looking disdainful. "This is very easy," Malfoy drawled, loud enough to Harry to hear him. "I knew it must have been if Potter could do it." "I bet you're not dangerous at all, are you?" he said to the hippogriff. "Are you, you big, ugly, great brute?" It happened in a flash of steely talons. Malfoy let out a high-pitched scream, and the next moment Hagrid was wrestling Buckbeak back into his collar as he strained to get at Malfoy, as Buckbeak strained to get at Malfoy, who lay curled in the grass, blood blossoming over his robes, so like blood pouring out over his robes. "I'm dying!" Malfoy yelled, as the class panicked. "I'm dying! Look at me! It's killed me!" "You're not dying," said Hagrid, who had gone very white. "Someone help me! Gotta get him out of here!" Hermione ran to open the gate, while Hagrid lifted Malfoy easily. As they passed, Harry saw that there was a long, deep gash in Malfoy's arm. Blood splattered the grass, and Hagrid ran with him up the slope towards the castle. Very shaken, the Care of Magical Creatures class followed at a walk. The Slytherins were all shouting at Hagrid. "They should sack him straight away," said Pansy Parkinson, who was in tears. "It was Malfoy's fault," snapped Dean Thomas. Crabbe and Goyle flexed their muscles threateningly. They all climbed the stone steps into the deserted entrance hall. "I'm going to see if he's okay," said Pansy, and they watched her run up the marble staircase. The Slytherins, still muttering about Hagrid, headed away in the direction of their dungeon common room. Harry, Ron, and Hermione proceeded upstairs to Gryffindor Tower. "Do you think he'll be all right?" said Hermione nervously. "Of course he will. Madame Pomfrey can mend cuts in about a second," said Harry, who had far worse injuries mended by the magical nurse. "That was a really bad thing to happen in Hagrid's first class, though, wasn't it?" said Ron, looking worried. Of course Malfoy would mess things up for him. They were among the first to reach the great hall at dinner time, hoping to see Hagrid, but he wasn't there. "They wouldn't fire him, would they?" said Hermione anxiously, not touching her steak and kidney pudding. "They'd better not," said Ron, who wasn't eating either. Harry was watching the Slytherin table. A large group, including Crabbe and Goyle, were huddled together, deep in conversation. Harry was sure they were cooking up their own version of how Malfoy had got injured. "Well, you can't say it wasn't an interesting first day back at school," said Ron gloomily. They went back up to the crowded Gryffindor common room after dinner and tried to do the homework Professor McGonagall had given them, but all three kept breaking off and glancing around toward the tower window. "There was a light on in Hagrid's hut," Harry said suddenly. Ron looked at his watch. "If we hurried, we could go down and see him. It's still pretty early." "I don't know," Hermione said slowly, and Harry saw her glance at him. "I'm allowed to walk across the grounds," he said pointedly. Sirius Black hasn't got Sirius Black hasn't got past the Dementors here, has he?" So they put their things away and headed out of the portrait hole, glad not to meet anybody on their way to the front doors, as they weren't entirely sure that they were supposed to be out. The grass was still wet and looked almost black in the twilight. They reached Hagrid's hut and knocked, and a voice growled, "Come in." Hagrid was sitting in his shirt sleeves at his scrubbed wooden table. His boarhound Fang had his head on Hagrid's lap. One look told him Hagrid had been drinking a lot. There was a pewter tankard almost as big as a bucket in front of him, and he seemed to be having difficulty in getting them into focus. "'Spect it's a record," he said thickly when he recognized them. "I don't reckon they've ever had a teacher who only lasted one day before." "You haven't been fired, Hagrid," gasped Hermione. "Not yet," said Hagrid miserably, taking a big gulp of whatever was in that glass. "But it's only a matter of time, isn't it, after Malfoy?" "How is he?" said Ron as they all sat down. "It wasn't a serious cut, was it?" "Oh, Madame Pomfrey fixed him up best she could," said Hagrid dully. "But he's saying it's still in agony, or like in heavy pain. He's covered in bandages and moaning." "He's faking it," said Harry at once. "Madame Pomfrey can fix anything. She regrew half my bones last year when Dobby had them knocked out." Well, you can bet Malfoy will milk this for all it's worth. The school governing board has been told, of course, said Hagrid miserably. They reckon I started too big. Should have left hippogriffs for later. Done flobberworms or something dumb like that. I just thought it'd make a good first lesson. It's all my fault. It's all Malfoy's fault, Hagrid, said Hermione earnestly. We're witnesses, said Hagrid. You said hippogriffs attack if you insult them. It's Malfoy's problem he wasn't listening. We'll tell Dumbledore what really happened. Yeah, don't worry, Hagrid. We'll back you up, said Ron. Tears linked out of the crinkled corners of Hagrid's beetle-black eyes. He grabbed both Harry and Ron and pulled them into a bone-breaking hug. I think you've had enough to drink, Hagrid, said Hermione firmly. She took the cup from the table and went outside to empty it. Maybe she's right, said Hagrid, letting go of Harry and Ron, who both staggered away, rubbing their ribs. Hagrid heaved himself out of his chair and followed Hermione unsteadily outside. They heard a loud splash. What's he done? Said Harry nervously as Hermione came back in with the empty tankard. Oh, he just stuck his head in the water barrel, said Hermione, pulling the cup away. Hagrid came back, his long hair and beard sopping wet, wiping the water out of his eyes. That's better, he said, shaking his head like a dog and drenching them all. Yuck. Listen, it was good of you to come and see me. Hagrid stopped dead, staring at Harry as though he only just realized what he'd done. Wait, what do you think you're doing, huh? He roared, so suddenly that everyone jumped about a foot in the air. You're not supposed to go wandering around after dark, Harry. And you two, letting him. Hagrid strode over to Harry, grabbed his arm, and pulled him into the door. Come on, Hagrid said angrily. I'm taking you back up to the castle, and don't let me catch you walking down to see me after dark again. I'm not worth it. We are on Chapter 7, The Boggart in the Wardrobe. This is a picture. Oh my gosh, I'm at 17 minutes. This is a picture of all the different hippogriffs in the book. My guess would be that this is Buckbeak. I guess it could be this one because this one's gray too, but this looks meaner. This guy looks a lot nicer. I do think it's cool that all of them have the same orange-colored eyes, regardless of what color pattern they have. Kind of like horses can be different colors, but they all kind of have the same shape of head and ears. I am at 17 going on 18 minutes. I'm sorry that took so long. I wanted to finish the rest of the chapter. Remember that the book and the movie are extremely different in the third book. If you've watched the third movie, you know that the way that the hippogriff thing went down was very, very different in the movie, and that Harry was riding Buckbeak for a lot longer in the movie than it was in the book. It's much more exciting to see in the movie than it is to hear it in the book, but the book gave us more details about what went on. If you're confused about why Hagrid all of a sudden flipped a switch on Harry and got really mad that he was out of the castle, Hagrid was so concerned and consumed with what was going on with himself that he wasn't thinking, and as soon as he realized that Harry was outside the castle after dark, he went berserk, because remember that Sirius Black is after Harry, and so this mass murderer really wants Harry, and so Hagrid can't believe that he put his own worries ahead of Harry's well-being, so he marched Harry back up to the castle. The next chapter is also really fun, and I hope that you guys have a great day. I'm sorry that this one took so long. I promise I will do a better job of keeping an eye on the clock. Have a great day. Don't forget to sing to your parents just like you sing to me, the beep beep like a sheep. I started saying that this morning while I was out with giving the sheep their feed this morning, and I was thinking about it, so beep beep like a sheep. Don't forget to introduce them to that song. I'm sure they'll be really thankful. All right, peace, you guys.